Hey folks, going to do a review. This is my 2023 KTM 450 XCF-W. It's been a great bike, feels great to ride, does everything it needs to do. Been riding it around down here in the Baja, and it really is a great bike, and we'll get to the point in a minute where we can talk about whether it's better or worse. Now the 2023 had traction control, it had the mapping 1 and 2, it had the separate start and stop switch. I put the 9mm master on it, so it had a softer clutch feel. It had preload on the front forks, so you could turn up a bit of preload if you wanted to. It had the compression and the rebound on top rather than being one on the bottom, like with the knobs on the bottom. So if you wanted to adjust it while you were riding along, it was probably a little bit better. But then getting to the 2024, no map switch, no traction control. It's got this finicky button here, so if you're trying to get up a hill, or you're stuck up on a rock, or you're on an awkward position, it's really hard to get to this start stop button. I'm thinking of maybe twisting it so that this is a little bit easier to get to. The start button on the old style start button was a lot easier and better to use. The clutch on this one, obviously it's a little bit heavy because it's the 10mm. It's got to move a bit more fluid. Yeah, it works all right. It's a little tiring, but hey, I'll probably just get used to it, or put the 9mm onto this one. The headlight switch is a little bit better on these now. Instead of having to pull a lever up, you just depress the button in. Oh, where is the button? It's down in here somewhere. Oh, I can't even see it. Where the hell is the button gone? Ah, here. So you just push the button in to turn it on, and you push the button in to turn it off. It's down in there. That's sort of a little bit better than the pull one. I've just put the handlebars forward on the most forward setting, so you actually got to undo the bar clamps completely off the triple clamp, and then rotate it around 180 degrees and put it back on, and that puts the handlebars forward. Riding both bikes in the sand, they tend to have the head shimmy about the same, so geometry that way feels a little bit the same. The 2023 does turn a little bit better at low speeds, so I'm going to attribute that to the engine being tilted back a little bit. I did some measurements between the foot pegs and the front axle line, and the foot pegs seem to be the same distance from the front wheel than the previous model, but this model doesn't feel like the foot pegs need to go back anymore. I quite often put 5mm lower and 5mm further back foot pegs on, and on the 24 model I haven't needed to do that. Power wise, they feel about the same, but the 23 seems to be a little bit torquier down low than what the 24 is. The 24 just seems to have a little bit more, I don't even know if it's got more top end power, it just likes to be ridden higher up in the rev range. So 24 just, I don't know if it's a more revvy bike, but it just needs to be revved a bit more to get the same sort of feeling of power out of it than the previous model. Front forks felt a bit stiff from the factory. I didn't count what the settings were. They've gone back to the compression being on top on both sides. It's a compression adjustment, and then easy rebound adjustment on the bottom on both sides. So you've got to make sure that you do adjust both sides. And I went 1 click more on the rebound and 2 clicks less on the compression than what the bike came with, and it rides really, really nice now. Suspension feels great on the bike. Geometry wise, the front feels a little heavier, which I did say on the 300XC felt a little bit more heavy in the front on the 24 model compared to the previous model. And that's the same goes for the 450XCF-W. The front just feels a little heavier. It's just a little bit more planted than what the previous model was. So it's more like a motocross bike than it is an enduro bike as far as the front feeling a little heavier. You got to give it just a little bit more gusto when you're getting up over logs and up ledges than what you did on the previous model. I put my brake tip on it, go to enduro.rocks, it comes back a little bit further, easier to use, and then I adjust the pedal up nice and high so it's easy to get to, nice on the downhills. The adjustment for the rear shock is really simple on these now. You've got a high speed adjuster and a low speed adjuster on the compression, which is really easy to adjust by hand. And then on the bottom they have this great big adjuster on the bottom. But the funny thing is, how it's come from the factory, I haven't needed to adjust it at all. It hasn't done anything silly. The PDS can do silly things sometimes. It hasn't done anything while I've been riding it. It feels good, even at high speed. Plastics are a little bit better than the previous model. You don't tend to get your boot caught under that, which we did report on the 300XC, which basically the same plastics. I haven't had to take the seat off on it. It comes with an electric fan, so I haven't had to take that off yet. No real reason to. The grab handle's pretty much useless, as I've talked before on the 24 on the 300XC. Usually grab it back here, but it feels a little bit more, feels like there's a little bit more to grab back here. A little bit hard to see on this video, a little dark in here, but there's a little bit of a lump here, so it's sort of easier to grab that now. It's got more of an edge when you want to pull it out of a hole. The exhaust on the 24 is a little bit more noisy than the 23. Not much, there's not much in it. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that it's not quite as quiet as what the 23 was, and yet the exhaust looks pretty much the same. It's just a different color. So I don't know what's going on with that. I haven't checked or measured, but the diameter of the header pipe on the 23 appears to be bigger than what the 24 does, and maybe that's why it has a little bit more power in the low end on the 23 than the 24. I don't know. It's sort of contradictory to what it should have. 24 has these silly radiator caps that are hard to get off at the best of times, but they are a little bit more accessible now, a little bit higher up, or the plastic's a little bit lower. So in one way you can get to them easier, but they're a little bit harder to get off. Whereas the old one is a little bit easier to get off, but they sit down a little bit lower, so you've got to get your hand down in there and it's close to the wiring on this side. So yeah, look, the 24, if you could get a 23 for a couple of grand less, if a dealer wanted to unload a 23, I would probably, for the saving of a couple of grand, I'd probably get the 23 rather than the 24. Because if you already have KTMs, you're going to probably already have a whole stack of the air filters. I've changed the air filter for this model, so it's a different shape. You're going to have to buy new ones. The chain on the 24s have to be a little bit looser than the 23s, because when they rotated the motor, apparently the sprocket is in a different spot, so you've got to run a little bit of a looser chain tension, and you know, when there's no one on the bike. The shifter I'm running at the stock position that it came with, and I usually raise them up a little bit, but I think if it was up higher it'd be too high. So I don't know whether things, it could be, it's probably because the motor's been tilted. It's put the gear shifter just up slightly, so it's not really something that you need to adjust, but on the 23 I had to put it up so you could get your boot under it. Other than that, it feels like a great bike. Suspension really feels good finally on these bikes. They finally got the air fork sorted out on the 2023, and then they went back to a spring fork on the 24 on the 300XC, so that was kind of odd. And there's no preload on these ones, so they've dropped the preload, but they've put adjustments on both sides top and bottom. Yeah, as I say, no map switch. They got this clumsy, pretty shitty start-stop button. Really a single button on each side is the way to go, because for the stop button you can put it where you're not going to bump it. You're not really going to bump these, but they're just hard to get to push that button. The 24 doesn't start as well as the 23, especially when it's hot. If you've got any sort of throttle, if you're even leaning on the throttle slightly, it won't start. You just got to take your hand right off the handlebars to start it. Talking about handlebars, it does come with a lower handlebar than the previous models, which is sort of kind of nice, but they do feel a little wide, so I'm going to run the measuring tape over those shortly and just see how much wider the bars are. On my bike, on the 23, I put the lower Pro Taper steering damper low bars on, and they got a really nice feel to them. But the feel of these bars, it seems to have the same sweep and about the same height as the Pro Taper steering damper lows. So other than the width, they seem to be very, very similar bars, with the exception that the curve must start earlier here and taper off sooner, so that you can bring your master cylinder in further without it starting to bind on the taper on the other Pro Taper bars. It gets a little bit crowded here, but on this it doesn't seem to be very crowded. Fuel cap, still the clumsy, shitty fuel cap to undo. I think the same guy that designed that designed the radiator cap, which is not as good. But other than that, yeah, it looks good. The styling's good. The seats are going to be hard to keep clean. The black seat obviously is pretty easy to keep clean, but you know, I haven't washed the bike, but I'm going to say that that's going to probably build up with a lot of sweat and stuff on that. Foot pegs are great. A bit wider than the previous model. Nice and grippy, but let's see how they go for durability. Usually the KTM foot pegs tend to break off a bit, and the kickstand's a little hard to get to when it's kicked up. So I've covered that on the 450XC. It sort of tucks under quite a bit here, so it makes it a little bit tough to get to. So you got to be a little bit more determined to get the kickstart down. The bloody kickstand down on it. So yeah, other than that, it's yeah, great bike, but I just don't think it's worth a couple of grand more. So if you can get a 23, I'd get the 23, and you're going to also have a lot better access to parts. The 23 came with a skid plate as well. The 24 didn't come with a skid plate, and I'm actually having trouble getting hold of one. So go figure, eh? Till next time, see ya.